Amazon is going to fill the sky with satellites. Astronomers aren't happy. Large constellations of satellites interfere with telescope observations, and Amazon will eventually add another 3,200 of them to the night sky. Scientists are concerned and searching for solutions. Amazon is set to launch 2 satellite prototypes for its Project Kuiper network, which will eventually number more than 3,200 orbiters. Project Kuiper could become a rival to SpaceX's Starlink constellation, which is now nearly 4,800 strong. Amazon's launch is planned for 2 p.m. Eastern Time October 6, 2023, with a backup launch window on October 7, 2023. This rapid growth of the satellite industry has come at a cost for astronomers and fans of the night sky, as 2 new studies and panels at an international astronomy conference stressed this week. Welcome back to Alternative Notions, where we keep you up to date on current events that might have world implications. We draw our sources from reliable news sources such as Wired, The Guardian, and Yahoo News. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want to stay informed. All spacecraft in low Earth orbit reflect sunlight, and some glint enough to be visible to the naked eye, artificial constellations that compete with stellar ones. Satellites can cause problems for astronomers when they streak across images, interfere with radio observations, or make hard-earned data less scientifically useful. By one estimate, there could be some 100,000 satellites swarming the skies in the 2030s. While scientists are mainly concerned about this aggregate effect, some individual satellites are very bright indeed. A study published in the journal Nature this week shows that a prototype of AST SpaceMobile's Blue Bird swarm has become one of the brightest objects in the heavens. Another study documents how even deliberately darkened satellites are still twice as bright, if not more, than the limit astronomers have called for to minimize effects on space science. Such concerns prompted a major conference this week, organized by the International Astronomical Union's Center for the Protection of the Dark and Quiet Sky from Satellite Constellation Interference, known as CPS. It's being held in the Canary Islands, where there are several observatories. It's the first in-person meeting of its kind, bringing together scores of astronomers, as well as satellite industry representatives, advocates of indigenous and environmental perspectives, and policy experts. We're on the cusp of a new era with a crowded, large zoo of satellites. Having a bunch of bright satellites in the sky will be very disruptive to astronomy, says Aparna Venkatasan, an astrophysicist at the University of San Francisco who spoke at the meeting about environmental and cultural views of the night sky. She co-authored an earlier study about how satellite proliferation boosts the risks of collisions in low Earth orbit and increases the amount of space junk. The CPS meeting was delayed multiple times because of COVID and a volcano eruption, so it's long overdue, Venkatasan says. But in a way, waiting has been a gift, because the astronomers and modelers and data takers have been able to organize. Astronomers are concerned that bright satellites can photobomb images and interfere with radio receivers, degrading astronomical data. A team working on the Vera Rubin Observatory in the Chilean Andes, which will become one of the most powerful telescopes on Earth when it opens next year, has proposed a brightness limit of apparent magnitude 7. Apparent magnitudes describe how bright something appears on Earth, not its absolute brightness. A distant galaxy can have a fainter magnitude than a nearby star or a much closer satellite, but most members of satellite constellations glow much brighter than that, at least part of the time. Satellite networks also create a diffuse light in the night sky, even from orbiters that aren't individually visible. That light will only brighten if satellites collide, creating reflective bits of flying junk that can't be masked in images. Starlink satellites have been involved in many near misses, including flying near China's Tiangong space station. While ground telescopes are the most impaired, a few space telescopes, especially Hubble, have been affected too. Since Hubble orbits slightly below some networks of satellites, a small but increasing percentage of its images have streaks in them. The conference organizers emphasize that astronomers generally don't oppose satellite constellations, which can deliver broadband access, navigation, and other important services. The potential benefits to humanity are great, but so are the associated concerns. Creative solutions and technological innovation are needed to confront and solve these problems, the conference's website states. But the attendees are struggling to address interference, thanks to satellites' growing numbers. From the astronomy point of view, there's nothing we can do to stop this. It's time to mitigate the effects and reduce the impacts, says Mike Peel, an astronomer at the Instituto de Astrofísica de Canarias, who co-leads the CPS's group focused on adapting observation strategies. Astronomers like Harrison Krantz at the University of Arizona are using telescopes to bear witness to these challenges. These satellites are going to make astronomy more difficult, but not impossible. Let's assess the situation and see what tools we have at our disposal, Krantz says. For example, sometimes astronomers can use software that masks pixels affected by streaking. They can also time some observations to avoid clusters of satellites, or avoid pointing their telescopes where satellites are brightest. Krantz and his colleagues recently published the results of a 2.5-year comprehensive survey finding that, despite some astronomers' assumptions, satellites tend not to be brightest at zenith, or directly overhead, where they're closest in range. Instead, they're brightest at mid-elevations opposite the Sun. Adapting observations isn't always possible, though, meaning some crucial data will be lost. Satellites also have a long history of interfering with radio telescopes, including the LOFAR network of low-frequency antennas and the Atacama Large Millimeter Array in Chile. Radio signals and electromagnetic radiation from satellites can create static that mimics signs of the cosmic phenomena astronomers are trying to study. It was always clear that satellites would have this effect, because all electronics have this. It's inevitable. We knew there would be leaked radiation, but we didn't know till now how much, says Benjamin Winkel, an astronomer at the Max Planck Institute for Radio Astronomy in Bonn, Germany, who is attending the conference. Winkel co-authored a study published earlier this year about the radiation levels and frequencies measured from 68 Starlink satellites that passed through the LOFAR station's beam during an hour of observation. Winkel says SpaceX has attempted to move radio traffic to other frequencies when their satellites fly above telescopes, and to keep their radio beams from being pointed too closely at them. But Winkel's paper concluded those efforts were insufficient, because telescopes are still sensitive to satellites' internal electronics. When we looked, something popped up, much brighter than anticipated. It's not a needle in the haystack, Winkel says, referring to the electromagnetic radiation from satellites' onboard electronics. Astronomers at the conference have some key fixes they want from the space industry: to darken satellites to at least magnitude 7, to avoid interfering with radio quiet zones around telescopes, to avoid radio frequency bands near the ones telescopes use, and to share more information with the astronomical community. Winkel points out that international regulations limit how much electromagnetic radiation smartphones and TVs can leak, but so far these rules haven't been applied to satellites. National regulations and international policies have been moving slower than innovation. Only voluntary changes have emerged so far. For example, SpaceX attempted to add visors to its satellites to block sunlight from hitting the bottom of the chassis, according to a company white paper in 2022. The visors did seem to dim the glint, but they got in the way of a new optical communication system, so the company abandoned the visors, according to SpaceX's paper. SpaceX has also tried adding coatings to the body of its spacecraft to darken them, and Krantz's team concluded that it did make them a bit fainter. That's significant progress, though the satellites are still 2.5 to 6 times brighter than the magnitude 7 threshold astronomers can live with, Krantz says. SpaceX has also begun experimenting with a dielectric mirror film to further darken its newest generation of satellites and allow radio waves to pass through them, according to the white paper. Representatives from SpaceX did not respond to Wired's requests for comment. But Patricia Kuiper, a former SpaceX vice president, told Wired, SpaceX has put a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of thought into its corrections. Kuiper is now the president of Constellation Advisory LLC, a group that advises satellite companies on policies and regulations. I am concerned that persistent calls to alarm without a meaningful focus on solutions will deter companies from trying, she says. In an emailed statement, Amazon spokesperson Breck Boyd wrote, as part of our prototype mission, we'll test an anti-reflection method on one of the 2 satellites to learn more about whether it's an effective way to mitigate reflectivity. The company also plans to use steering and maneuvering capabilities to orient the solar array and spacecraft to minimize reflection from surfaces, according to that statement. Starlink now comprises more than half of all satellites in orbit, and SpaceX is seeking regulatory approval for 30,000 more. Amazon has some catching up to do, though the company plans to fill out its fleet of more than 3,000 by 2029. Both companies' networks will fly at similar altitudes, between 342 and 392 miles above the Earth. Other networks include OneWeb, which has more than 630 satellites orbiting at a much higher altitude, 750 miles. They are therefore dimmer, but take longer to pass out of a telescope's field of view. AST SpaceMobile's Bluebird network of communications satellites could number 150 or more, with more than 100 planned for launch by the end of next year. The new Nature paper, produced by a team of about 40 researchers, found that its prototype, Blue Walker 3, launched in 2022, reflects more light than almost any star. It is also rather large by satellite standards, at nearly 700 square feet including its broad solar array. Blue Walker was a shock to us as to how bright it was. We are also very worried about the impact to radio astronomy, since one of its downlink frequencies is next to a protected radio band at 42.5 to 43.5 GHz, says John Barantini, one of the study's co-authors and a conference attendee. A Tucson, Arizona-based astronomer, he is also the executive officer of Dark Sky Consulting, which advises companies and government officials on outdoor lighting to preserve dark night skies. "We are working to address the concerns of astronomers," wrote Scott Wisniewski, AST Space Mobile's chief strategy officer, in an email to Wired. That includes using roll tilting flight maneuvers to reduce the satellite's brightness, and preventing them from transmitting near radio telescopes. The company is also planning to equip its next-generation satellites with anti-reflective materials, Wisniewski wrote. Astronomers and industry representatives have more work to do to find solutions. Maybe the best we can hope for now is a somewhat uneasy coexistence with industry, Barantini says. The two have to share a single resource, the night sky. My hope is that we can find a way to do it that minimizes harm to astronomy, he says. Amazon launches first 2 satellites in planned orbital internet service. Test satellites for Project Kuiper network, which will compete with Elon Musk's Starlink, launched on Friday afternoon. Amazon launched its first 2 prototype satellites into space on Friday, as Jeff Bezos' tech giant races to compete with Elon Musk's SpaceX in building a mega constellation of broadband internet-providing satellites. The test satellites were set to launch from Florida's Cape Canaveral Space Force Station during a 2-hour window that opens at 2 p.m. EDT, 6 p.m. GMT, and they blasted off smartly at the top of the time window. The satellite duo, called KuiperSat-1 and KuiperSat-2, will be deployed in an orbit 311 miles, 500 kilometers, above Earth's surface. From there, tests will be performed to the spacecraft's systems, solar arrays will be deployed to generate power, and attempts will be made to beam internet connections from space to a customer terminal on Earth. This is Amazon's first time putting satellites into space, and we're going to learn an incredible amount regardless of how the mission unfolds, Rajiv Badyal, Vice President of Technology for Project Kuiper, said in a statement. Amazon said the project aims to bring fast internet connection to communities around the world that are currently unserved or underserved by traditional internet and communications options. The prototype satellites are part of Amazon's Project Kuiper, a communications network that the company plans to eventually consist of more than 3,200 satellites to launch over the next 6 years. Amazon's license with the U.S. Federal Communications Commission requires that it has at least half of the Project Kuiper satellites in orbit by mid-2026. The company hopes to begin providing service to some customers by late 2024. But the project has a lot of catching up to do. Its main competitor, SpaceX, already has about 5,000 satellites in orbit as part of its Starlink broadband network, while the UK government-owned OneWeb has nearly 650 satellites in orbit. The project itself has also suffered setbacks. Amazon originally planned to launch KuiperSat-1 and KuiperSat-2 on a rocket built by ABL Space Systems last year, but the rocket failed in its initial launch. Amazon then shifted its satellites to ULA's Vulcan Centaur debut mission, which was then also delayed to late 2023. Satellite internet is often touted as the future of internet connectivity, with its capacity to bridge the digital divide and provide high-speed internet for people who live in rural or hard-to-serve places. The technology could also be a critical backstop when hurricanes or other natural disasters disrupt communication. But the race to deploy a mega constellation of thousands of satellites has raised alarms in the scientific community, and some astronomers have called for a cap to the number of low-altitude satellites to reduce light pollution and preserve our ability to study the skies. The potential benefits to humanity are great, but so are the associated concerns, states a conference organized this week by the International Astronomical Union to address concerns about the impact of large satellite constellations to the night sky. There are also concerns about entrusting the world's satellite communications to the whims of a pair of long-feuding megalomaniac billionaires. Last month, Musk acknowledged denying his Starlink network in order to prevent a Ukrainian drone attack on a Russian naval fleet. Musk's threats to withdraw Starlink communications, a digital lifeline in Ukraine since the early days of the war, had been previously reported at various stages of the conflict, but his admission marked the first time he cut off Ukrainian forces in the middle of a specific operation. Amazon's Project Kuiper, which kicked off its research and development phase in 2018, is poised to be a bit like both. The company plans to provide both small customer terminals and a ground-based communications network. Vodafone and its African branch, Vodacom, have partnered with Amazon to use Project Kuiper to expand their 4G/5G networks. This new collaboration, announced in September, mirrors Amazon's 2021 deal with Verizon to enhance telecom services in the United States. After years of development, the moment is finally here. Amazon will send 2 of its Kuiper test satellites to space, as the company looks to take on reigning incumbent SpaceX with its own satellite internet constellation. The 2 prototypes will launch aboard a United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket from Cape Canaveral in Florida during a 2-hour launch window that opens at 2 p.m. as stated in a recent blog post. Amazon said the 2 satellites, dubbed Kuiper Sat-1 and Kuiper Sat-2, are the first iterations of more than 3,200 satellites Project Kuiper plans to manufacture and deploy over the next 6 years. Although the company will have a long way to go before filling the skies with its mega constellation, the launch represents a key milestone and will no doubt give Amazon's technical Kuiper team tons of data on satellite performance. We've done extensive testing here in our lab and have a high degree of confidence in our satellite design, but there's no substitute for on-orbit testing, said Rajiv Badyal, Project Kuiper's Vice President of Technology. This is Amazon's first time putting satellites into space, and we're going to learn an incredible amount regardless of how the mission unfolds. Like SpaceX's Starlink, customers will be able to use Kuiper Internet by purchasing individual terminals. This prototype mission will test how the satellites interact with those terminals, as well as the ground systems that the satellites will use to communicate with Earth. Amazon is aiming to launch its first production satellites in the first half of next year and start beta testing with customers by the end of 2024. The company has a bit of pressure to move fast. It has to have at least half of its planned constellation in orbit by 2026 to be in compliance with its spectrum license from the U.S. Federal Communications Commission. Back in 2020, Amazon said it would invest more than $10 billion in Kuiper across the ground network, satellite testing and manufacturing, and user terminals. While humanity certainly are making giant strides toward technological advancement, here are some causes of concern that could arise from it. Impact on astronomy. The increasing number of satellites, particularly those from mega constellations like Starlink and Project Kuiper, is causing issues for astronomers. Satellites can interfere with observations, create streaks in images, and make radio observations challenging. Bright satellites can disrupt ground-based and space telescopes, such as the Vera Rubin Observatory and Hubble, affecting the quality of astronomical data. Light pollution and night sky visibility. The presence of numerous satellites in the night sky contributes to light pollution, making it difficult for astronomers and stargazers to observe celestial objects. The diffuse light created by satellites can potentially increase if collisions occur, generating more reflective debris. Radio frequency interference. Satellites can interfere with radio telescopes, producing static that mimics cosmic phenomena. This interference hinders the study of the universe using radio signals. Efforts to move radio traffic to different frequencies have been insufficient, and electromagnetic radiation from satellites can affect sensitive radio telescopes. Technological challenges and solutions. The brightness of satellites is a major concern, and efforts to darken them have been only partially successful. Even darkened satellites remain brighter than the preferred threshold for astronomers. Proposed solutions include darkening satellites, avoiding interference with radio-quiet zones around telescopes, staying clear of specific radio frequency bands, and sharing information with the astronomical community. Regulatory and policy issues. National regulations and international policies have not kept pace with the rapid innovation in satellite technology. Current regulations are voluntary, and there's a call for more stringent rules to address the impact on astronomy. Concerns include the lack of application of regulations regarding electromagnetic radiation leakage, as is seen in other electronic devices. Competition and satellite deployment. The intense competition between companies like SpaceX, Starlink, and Amazon, Project Kuiper, to deploy large constellations raises concerns about the potential environmental and astronomical consequences. While there is recognition of the potential benefits of satellite constellations, broadband access, communication services, there's a need to find a balance that minimizes harm to astronomy. Safety and collisions. The proliferation of satellites increases the risk of collisions in low Earth orbit, leading to more space debris. This debris poses threats to other satellites and spacecraft. Rise in 5G radiation. Concerns related to the deployment of 5G technology include apprehensions about potential health effects due to increased exposure to radio frequency, RF, radiation, despite current scientific consensus suggesting adherence to safety guidelines. The denser network of small cells and antennas required for 5G has raised worries about proximity to residential areas, while increased energy consumption is a consideration. Privacy concerns focus on data security as more devices connect to the network. Additionally, aesthetic objections, potential property value impacts, and concerns about interference with weather forecasting frequencies have been raised. Engaging communities in decision-making and addressing public awareness gaps are also areas of concern. While scientific studies generally affirm the safety of 5G within established limits, ongoing research and community engagement remain essential to address potential issues associated with its deployment. That's all we have for today. We hope that you gained something out of this video. Make sure to like and subscribe for more videos. This was another alternative notion. Take care.